So I have here traditional companies as a silo with the sacred cow at the bottom, and the crowdsourced one, which is much more difficult to draw, over on the right. So if we look at some traditional thinkings in traditional companies, all products are developed in-house or only under great pains are things farmed out. So you have a department of people, can be marketing or product development. It's like, we make products, and the rest of you do what the rest of you do. But that's what we do. Scale is driven by your ability to lock competitors out early in the product launch or during development. So the iPhone, great example, they patent the daylights out of all the touchscreen stuff, and they're waiting to sue people that come along. Now contrast that with somebody like IBM. They don't own their means of production anymore. They use somebody else's, and they make a lot of money doing it. So there's an example of success of a crowdsourced idea. There are still a lot of companies, and Apple really, I love Apple as much as anybody, but they are one of the most closed companies you'll ever find. They sue kids that blog about new releases. Service is an expense against sales. So if we take the example of Compaq subbing out its service to the crowd and letting peers handle their work, and contrast that against a typical company who builds a big customer service force and then tries to think of all these ways to get rid of it and send it to China, there's a big difference there. And the purpose of this slide is to help you understand fundamental difference in thinking between crowdsourcing and the rest of the world. They involve vendors as little as possible, or they do so in a very punitive way. They treat them like, design this thing to my specs or go away. A company like Boeing says, work with us, and we know you can probably make it better than we ever thought anyway, so tell us what you think, and work off looser specs. Or in the case of Leafin, just self-organize yourselves and give us what we want, and maybe the motorcycle will work. Innovation is a privilege, not a responsibility. And this talks directly to the presenteeism. There are, again, in certain departments, they have a responsibility and a privilege to innovate. And people either lower in the ranks or outside the company are not allowed to innovate. So let's contrast that against crowdsourcing. In crowdsourcing, you create a market. So Linux said, or Linus Torvalds said, I will make this thing that is equal to or better than the best product out there, and I'm going to give it away. Which doesn't make a whole lot of economic sense. But it does if you're Red Hat or IBM and you're making money off that design. So again, to hammer the point home a little bit more, if you're Google and you say, well, our search engine works really good, why don't we open up the code and allow anybody with a website to use our search engine? That's heresy in a lot of companies. So the environment, as it were, which again, very difficult to draw, is the general public. If Google is exposed to the general public, anyone can take part in the Google code or make use of it. Same thing for Amazon. Then you have a group called the prosumers, which in Linux language would be people that are interested enough and know enough to contribute. They're like a professional. They use Linux and they also build it. So you've just completely evaporated the wall between the customers and the company. They're doing the same thing. They're the same people. Vendor as partner, we already talked about that with Boeing. So we're getting closer to the center of the organization as we go. Employees as meritocracy, and Google and Netflix are probably about as far down this road as you can go, where titles really aren't so bad and are such a big deal, and you can vote on where the company's going through the internet, intranet. And then in the center, you have a steering committee or limited management, or smaller management structure. So Liffin's making motorcycles, but they're very, very small. It's like a holding company that is just the organizer of all of the vendors that are creating parts for the motorcycle. So that's the best way I can describe the contrast between the two. So let's get into an example. So I'm going to give you some case examples about how people are using crowdsourcing. Goldcorp is a Canadian mining concern, and they're featured in the book Wiconomics. And what they had a problem in the 90s in that they had a gold mine, not in the diamond yet, that was 50 years old and it wasn't producing. And they had a new CEO who was out of a mutual fund who knew absolutely nothing about mining. And there was tremendous resentment against his placement there. That his predecessor had dirt under his fingernails and could speak to the mining community. So they were faced with this horrible problem of declining gold prices and less gold coming out of the mine, and it's getting more expensive to take out. So in 1999, the guy's name is Rob McEwen, he instructed his geologists to make public all of the 50 years of geological information that the company had. And they said, "You're nuts, because our competition, we don't own this mine. We rent it from the government, and it's not ours. So if someone had this data, and we don't make use of it very quickly, someone could use it and take advantage of us and outperform us." He said, "Do it anyway," and they launched what's called the Goldcorp Challenge. And they gave away $575,000 to anyone who could come up with a better way to extract the mine than they could. And there was tremendous resentment amongst the engineers at the company. They felt they'd been betrayed and by someone who knew absolutely nothing about what they did. So the contest was online. It drew 1,200 people from 50 countries, and here's the results. 110 sites were identified. 50% of them were new sites. 80% produced gold. They found 8 million ounces, and the company's value from 1999 to current value is 100 to 9 billion pounds. And the winner of the contest was a company called Fractal Technologies out of Australia, and they're not in the mining business. And what they did is they took all the data that came out of this 50 years of data, was 500 megabytes of data, flat data, and they modeled this. I don't have a good picture, but the picture's down in the lower right-hand corner. They made a visual model of where the gold had been found and sort of exploited where it might be based on the other geological information. I couldn't even begin to describe to you how, but the bottom line is they looked at it instead of looked at a bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet. And that was the winning proposal, and all of theirs hit. All of their suggestions hit every time. So that, to me,
I heard this guy interviewed, and they had 2 other things that came out. One was the HR department went wild because they hired like the top 50 people who entered the contest and helped identify like the most brilliant people you would ever want to hire to help you do mining.
Right.
And then I think since then the CEO's been fired.
Really?
I think he got in a big fight with the board, and the culture clash was just too much. And
old corporation.
right. But no, it was a huge success and very, very wonderful. But check that out. I heard him interviewed, and he was like on to another job after this great case study.
Wow, I hope he had stock options.
Yeah, I'm sure he's very well.
Okay. The other things that came out of that, and it's sort of the wisdom of the crowd mentality, is that, and in crowdsourcing, some circles believe that the amateur actually has an advantage over someone that's in place. As far as what I do every day, the amateur has an advantage in supporting the expert, not being the expert. And the other thing is, I don't think a lot of companies would buy that. But amateurs have made significant contributions to the world. Kodachrome color photography, developed by a musician.